What are you working on in the doc community right now? What are some of the exciting things that are happening and moving forward?
So this is good. So in terms of what we're going for here, because it was just earlier today, I was also talking to somebody else, and they're like, like what's really the objective here is that it's about knowledge sharing. We're trying to empower people to make these things easier and give people more options. Precisely what you're saying about empowering folks that are working with Kubernetes, so that it's not so overwhelming, so that they can have that conversation with teammates, with their boss, to make suggestions and all overall to provide better experiences and better value for their customers and in their companies. Imagining someone who's literally starting from scratch, starting from zero, no one should have to feel embarrassed about what they don't know. Just know that they're in a space where they can have access to learn from people that do have experience. So one of the things that we do as well too in every meetup because of that, because generally we could say our target, SREs, DevOps, DBAs, developers as well, people that are interested in infrastructure, chaos engineering, because we were talking about outages earlier, and that's an interesting topic too. People also that are more from a security background. So because they're, if Kubernetes is a big topic and then we say data on top of it, wow, that just got enormous, So we trying to hit as many different angles as possible.
DBAs are kind of, let's face it, these are my people. This is we made the world what it is today, and there's no denying it. But as everything happens, it's an evolution. And so, you and I have talked about this, and I've been talking to a lot of folks about it, is this whole transition where I want to help a large group of people get to one place, and that's that DBA to SRE transition. Well, DBA's been a really important gatekeeper in a lot of ways, because data infrastructure is typically the most expensive, right? That's where you get your high performance storage. That's where you get the most expensive servers, and for good reason. I mean, that if your database is slow, then everything is slow, and has been and still will be the center of the universe for running applications, whether it was back in my LAMP stack back in the day, or your CGI Perl one, which I guess that was LAMP, but to cloud native, modern data apps are still a thing. And thinking about all of the aspects, like being able to test performance, being able to know how the security should be set up.
You guys have built something that's a little unique, because you have stayed true to the Apache 2 license. We've seen that a lot of other companies have already started to shift. They've started to, we're going to do, whether it's SSPL, a lot of people want AGPL.
Yeah.
But you have stuck with Apache 2. Now, what was that? You chose that, 4 or 5 years ago now. Is that something that you felt pressure to change?
No, actually, it's been, there's theory and there's practice. There's always some level of worry about if you got the theory wrong, but when you see it work out in practice, it just makes it a lot easier, right? So our theory in 2016 was we need to not just think about the database, we need to think about the consumption of the database, right? And it wasn't a big secret that the world would eventually head to DBAS, but it wasn't clear when. So we said, you know what, we're going to strike the balance between the two sides and build something completely radical and unique. We're going to build a software-defined DBAS, so one that we can run when the time comes, but one the enterprises can run themselves, and that sits outside the database. So we'll make the database mostly free, or open source. A small percentage of the database features would be held closed. And we launched the company in the end of 2017, and we said for our license, we're not picking AGPL because, hey, Mongo was AGPL, and it still didn't stop Amazon and Azure from having a competing Mongo service, and Elastic was something, they changed their license. So changing licenses doesn't really stop people from competing.
First, many times it's good to be a latecomer, because as a latecomer, you can come late and review everybody's mistakes and take the best and try to improve so you don't necessarily need to be the smartest, you just get the experience of others. We came not just a little bit behind, but we came after everyone had their own NoSQL solutions, and they were relatively mature. So we have to just rush and go and implement everything. And initially it's very helpful because you don't necessarily need to make a lot of decisions. You need to make decisions in terms of the underlying implementation, but not the API. So it's relatively easy, and it allows you to move fast and also to do things better. But now that we're kind of accomplished the API of Cassandra and the API of DynamoDB, now this is where it gets complicated, and we create new APIs, and that's a harder job, to be the first person that ever toys with new features. But it's also interesting and cool. Scylla is performance oriented, but in order to get it, the whole idea is to have great out-of-the-box experience. We have a shell script, which is the installation tool, that you just run it and it automatically configures all of the right kernel settings, all of the right OS settings with one command. It creates a RAID device with the right striping. It configures NTP. It does everything. And we even measure, that tool runs a mini benchmark in order to evaluate the disk performance, because one of the benefits of Scylla is not to queue on the file system or on the disk, do the queuing within Scylla, so we can control and prioritize what's low latency I/O and what's not latency sensitive. So our installation tool measures the disk performance. So we try to, and it's just one command that you run once and that's it. So simplicity matters a lot. I relate to it a lot, and also functionality, like the CDC is like super beneficial, and you can hook Scylla to Kafka super easily, etc. And there's other features that are really important. It's not just about performance.
It's a funny game how you get inspired by one tool and you inspire someone else, and you use something and someone else uses your code back or your functionality back. I just love that about open source. So that's how Orchestrator began, and then it grew out of that position into, okay, let's try and do at least partial failovers. Let's try and figure out how to overcome the fact that we don't have GDIDs yet. 5.6 was only coming out. It was very early days for GDID. It wasn't easy to migrate into GDID, and so that's where Orchestrator came up with pseudo GDID. I then joined Booking.com, and then we realized Orchestrator could be the high availability solution for Booking.com's topologies, and that's what we did. So during my time at Booking.com, my main focus was to turn Orchestrator into a failure detection and recovery mechanism that could, promote new primaries, take some servers out of the game and completely rehaul the existing topologies, or rethink the existing topologies we had at Booking.com.
What is that thing that you keep on seeing companies make the same mistake over and over again, and you just wish they would stop?
Using the wrong tool for the round peg square hole syndrome, right? Where
Okay.
we've made an investment into X technology, so we're using that technology. A use case comes in that doesn't quite fit it, and so then we just fight with it's not a good fit, and we continue to fight with it's not a good fit, and understandably, right? You don't necessarily want to always spin up new technologies, but that's the beauty of these open source databases, right? They're different. They're designed for different use cases, and there's no one size fits all. But there's generally a size that really fits what you need, and because enterprises, it's not a trivial thing, right? If I say, hey, just use this technology, well, that's like a 2-year project to get that spun up, where it's like, well, we already have this infrastructure in place, so let's continue to use that. And then sometimes if it's the wrong use case, it's just pain from that point on. And so I think that's one that, being willing to do that and have access to those other database options, that would be a good thing.
before joining Percona, I have never opened MySQL source code. It was like something unbelievable in my case. And I remember working with Marco in some cases, and he said, "Well, it's open source, dude. Let's open the source." And once I started to get familiar with things, I was always then attracted for crashing. In every new ping we got on Slack, and it was crash signal 6, signal 11. No one wanted to touch those type of cases, and I was like, leave to me. So it was like an opportunity to get a real case scenario and like explore a bit more of the source code. And then I remember I tried to apply to an engineering position, but it was like some senior position, and I was not accepted. And basically talking with Karina, my manager at the time, I said, well, that's actually what I want. And she spoke with George, which is my actual manager at the moment, and we did some sort of arrangement. I worked 4 days a week on support and 1 day a week as a engineer, a C++ engineering.
But what Elastic did was they have shifted from the Apache license, open source, to the SSPL license. Now, I've been ticked off on Twitter for calling SSPL proprietary, which I thought was really funny because there's these big proprietary companies who are quite happy being proprietary and have made a lot of money out of it. You know, I don't think they consider it a dirty word. It's only a dirty word if you've been disingenuous and you've allowed people to believe you're open. So if everybody is honest, if everybody's straightforward, if everybody has their cards on the table, it's not a problem. You choose to be proprietary, you're proprietary. You choose to be open, you're open. Where I think the problem has come is for whatever reason, and you could be right, it could be that the founders thought it was fine when they started, but there is a shift with VC investment. Where that problem comes is when you can't generate revenue because others are able to use your code for free. And that's not, it is an open source issue, but if you go back to the strip mining you were talking about, and you look at the New York Times piece on that from, I think it was December 2019.
Yep.
And I was really surprised to see that, because to me it was like, hey, open source is in the New York Times. But if you read the article, it doesn't actually talk about open source particularly. It's talking about the service layer in the cloud environment and small companies not getting to sit at that table, not getting their share of that service layer. Yeah, I guess we're in a world where, I mean, you know much more about that than I do in that whole database piece, but I guess we're in a world where a company's value isn't necessarily measured on profitability, right? And that's the kind of shifts that we were talking about, that right back at the beginning when I was saying that as a lawyer joining an open source company, you have to unlearn what you know. I think there's a lot of unlearning around economics as well. What we want to do now is take a totally different approach, and we want to look at uptake of open source, and then we want to try and work out value, the value that that's generating. So moving away from this GDP focus, for me, that's sort of educating our government, educating our business folk to the importance of open, because I want to see them invest in it. And I want to see them invest in it both through laws and policy, but also in their business spend, with an understanding how important it is. And it sort of leads on to what you were saying about education. So I think we've done the generation behind us a bit of a disservice, right? For developers who grew up after 89, after the Linux kernel, we just kind of assumed that they would get it. Whereas those of us a little longer in the tooth, we went through a process where we were rejecting an existing system. We didn't want copyright. We didn't want, I guess we don't get away from copyright as a misstatement, but we didn't want proprietary. We wanted to move to this open licensing, and it was a choice and an understanding, and for some a battle and a war. And we just kind of expected the next generation to get it. And that was wrong. It wasn't fair. They're not going to just get it.
Like I would say 5 years ago, it was hard to do some performance diagnostic because we didn't have perf and we only had O profile, and it was so heavy. And now we have perf that improved performance diagnostic a lot. Now we have BPF trace, which, it's dtrace for Linux. So that's also great move forward. So perhaps that's one thing that I could say that is hard in the open source environment. Moving people to newer versions, so the big enterprises, they use open source, they now embrace Linux, they are sure that's the way to go, but they're super conservative and they are still running 2.6 kernels, right? So,
really? Wow.
Yeah. Like I have, I don't know, 5.14, 5.16 in my laptop. These guys are running, 2.632 with 1,000 patches. Literally probably has 1,000 patches on top, but still, right? And some stuff is backported, some stuff is backported in an incomplete way. But yeah, that's hard. And sometimes people doesn't believe you if you tell them, oh, that old kernel, your NVMe drives, they're probably not gonna give you all their juice because there are no proper schedulers, IO schedulers for those. And, the drivers for SCSI, they didn't have the multi-queue stuff. So it was like, yeah, you need to upgrade. And that's kind of hard. Like getting people to upgrade, people's running MySQL 5.5, Mongo 3.2, all stuff that it's end of life. If I am using a product and you change the license, like it happened with Mongo, like the change they didn't affect most users, but they certainly affected their freedoms. Now, those users no longer have one of the freedoms they used to have. And so that point is, they can also change other freedom tomorrow. They changed one that didn't affect you, or apparently, but they could change another one tomorrow. And they could, when they come out with new features, oh, look, the article I gave you today, it's like, you can see great improvements going into the enterprise version and not into the open source version. And yes. MongoDB has done that since the beginning. MariaDB is doing it now with the redo log options, advanced redo log options, and yeah, that actually hurts people when things are geared towards pushing customers into an enterprise option. But yeah, like your example with McDonald's, like the guys found a way to actually fix those machines. And they started sharing because they somehow knew that sharing, someone will come up with an improvement, a fix, a cheaper way to build that toy that will plug to the ice cream machine and fix it. So, that's community as well, right? Like that was a community in action. And that's the one great thing. And that's why I think Facebook open sourced that stuff.
I think the most common mistake is focusing on backups. Actually, backups don't matter.
Okay.
And it's quite shocking saying this in a conference about backups. Backups only matter for compliance. That's the only reason you are forced to have some kind of backup. What really matters is recovery. You don't need a backup strategy. You don't need to think about backups. You need to think about recovery, because the important subject is recovery. If you have a great backup, but for whatever reason you are not able to recover it in time, for example, then your backup, it doesn't matter. I used to say that you can have 19. I prefer to have 99 failed backups and one successful recovery than 99 successful backups and one failed recovery, because the real critical issue is recovery. And this is the whole point of the beginning of my talk was, you need to think about the things that can happen. Obviously, the amount of things that can happen is infinite, and you can't probably prepare for everything. And then you have to decide what kind of protections you are going to apply, and then prepare the backups to cover these possible incidents. This brings me an interesting concept. It's the shreddinger backup. This is a backup that you did successfully, but you are not able to recover. So it's a backup that is at the same time is in two states. So for example, if you have a really large database, you can have some fast disks. You can have all the infrastructure to be able to make the backup. But if you don't have a good support contract, in the case of you are working with bare metal, you can find that your server is not available and you will need 1 week to get the server. So the whole point is that you need to think on the problems and then fix them. And obviously, you need to test your backups. And this is a cost that you need to assume. It's pretty much the same that if you buy an insurance, we are used to pay for insurance, for security, physical security, guards and things like that. We also have to pay for backups, and we need to know what we want to be protected of. So in the case of a really huge database, or whatever, if you really want to recover it, you need to test backups. My recommendation is first, do not use a single backup strategy. What I mean is, don't, usually backup is pretty much like, well, I have a backup, that's it. I really recommend, for example, use a mixed strategy of physical and logical backups. So sometimes, for example, once a week you do a physical backup, then every day you perform incrementals, and then maybe once a month you perform a logical backup. Just to have both versions of the thing, okay? For various reasons. For example, if you have some kind of corruption, sometimes you can, by copying the files, you are transmitting the corruption, you are replicating the corruption. If you force reading the whole database, you will find that corruption. The database server will detect it and say, okay, I have here in this block of disk something is broken, and if possible, backup your bin logs also. And regarding how long you have to keep your backups, it depends on compliance. It depends on the size of the database, obviously, because the bigger, more space you need to store the database. And it depends also on what you want to be protected of.
What would you say is the number one problem that developers continually fall into when trying to build their databases and design their applications when it comes to SQL?
I think the number one problem is to not version control their database from the beginning. So they want to just try around a little bit and add some table here and some table there. And before they know it, they go live with some great table scripts, and it's a complete mess. So they don't think about how to increment their database schema. And if you have to do that after the fact, it's much harder to get it right. So I think the number one problem for developers is to, from the beginning, use something like Liquibase or Flyway or whatever tool helps you be very diligent and very careful about your database schema design, of course, as we discussed earlier, but also evolution. So the database schema evolution is one of the still, I think, unsolved problems. So Flyway offers a lot of simple tooling to just get the database increment scripts in the right order, but it's just very script-based, so you can do everything the database can do, but it's script-based. You have to do everything manually. Liquibase offers a little bit more help with the XML or YAML or JSON format, I think, what they're doing. And So you have some abstraction over the dialects and syntax, and maybe a little bit easier to manage. But you have to do a lot of stuff manually. I think there's still room for a new vendor to solve problems in this area. But even if that's not available yet, you should think about how to properly increment your database changes and version control them. So it's really weird that we're using version control for all languages, but not for SQL.
If you have too many connection, then there is some stage that you won't able to connect to the more connection to that server. So you need connection pooler, because sometimes there is no need to. You need to think about your active users. So you need to have some kind of a pooler, and PG Bouncer is the one of the best pooler available. So you have to put PG Bouncer, and then you can use the database. But if you have a very best connection, then don't use the PG pooler that you can use directly to the database. But if you have a large number of connection, then I think PG Bouncer is the one of the best solutions.
Is there any risk when you add additional extensions that the core database slows down?
Yes. Actually, you need to trust some trusted extensions, because that's the issue. If you start installing the extension from third party, and you have to look at who is building that, who is behind that. If somebody you don't know about that, and that extension is not a well-known extension, then there is a risk even your database can crash. You have to be very careful, because people don't use a third-party extension if it's not written by well-known people. So it should be some well-known company behind that, which is supporting that, so its code is well-written and well-documented, and it's work perfectly. So then they start using that. Otherwise, it's a risk. Some kind of an extension, if a PostGIS and something like that, so you don't have to worry about that, because it's well-known extension. So you don't have to worry to install PostGIS or PostgreSQL FTW like that. So, but if you are talking about some extension which is not well known, it can cause performance issue. It can cause the stability issue.
One of the surprising things that I learned during your session was the recommendation for the shared buffers is only 25% of your total memory.
Yeah, it's not default. Default is very low. Default value is very low. And when you're talking about 25%, it's just a documentation thing. Because it was documented at that time when we have a database and have an application server on the same system. So when you have an application server and some other stuff and a database on the same system, then you cannot give a 70% to the database. So application server or something else need memory. So that's why people saying that 25% is the good one. But I'm talking about when you have a dedicated database. So why not give the maximum you can give to the database? Because usually now a database is a standalone system nowadays. So you can give 60%, 70%, so you can give that. It will give you a really good performance. But keep in mind, you have to think about your workload. If your workload is just 30% of your total RAM, so why you are giving you 70%, 60%, 30% is enough for that? Because there is no advantage of giving more to the database. Yeah, the shared buffer, because the other are some dedicated one, like the ball buffer, the workman, the maintenance workman. They are all for the specific purpose. But shared buffer is the common one. Okay. If you want to say that you have to tune your database as a memory concept, tune your shared buffer first. That's it.
No, it's still got the same. Just because there's no create table statement doesn't mean that you don't have to work out what your collection or document structure is. In MongoDB, we have a chapter on this in the book. Obviously, it's sort of the same in a way. It's got a lot of the same considerations as relational modeling, but and you'll see it in all the MongoDB material on their website. There's a lot of talk about, do I link everything? Do I embed everything? So for instance, the naive model for MongoDB is I just have an object and I just dump it into the database as a JSON document, and it's got repeating groups in it. It's got arrays and arrays of embedded objects. But MongoDB can only have 16 megabytes in that one object. So you can't put, for instance, every tweet for a user if you're doing some sort of like Twitter-like application. You've got to break it out somehow. But you might have enough room to put every line item for an order. That might always fit in 16 megabytes. If you do things like repeating the name of a product in the embedded document, when you need to change the name of a product or change its price code or anything like that, you're going to have to update it in not one spot, but a zillion different spots, as many documents as there are orders. And all of those trade-offs are just as real today in MongoDB as they were 10 years ago in MySQL. It's just a matter of, what sort of denormalization do we want? We don't sort of have quite so easy joins, so we want to avoid splitting stuff up, but we can't embed everything in the same document. So there's a whole sort of discipline for MongoDB, and it comes down to whether you link documents or embed them or do some sort of hybrid pattern. Yeah, so we our aim is to sort of be at the intersection of database technology and blockchain technology. So, now I just can't help going into pitch mode here, so just forgive me as I do it.
That's okay.
Go into pitch mode and all that. But one of the things that I noticed when I was working with databases, for most of my professional life, is that we didn't really have any way of guaranteeing the contents of the database. I knew as a DBA that I could just manipulate the database and leave no trace. And beyond that, you could get down to the database files and change bits and bytes in there, or go straight to the disk. And so when the database says, this row or this document was inserted on this timestamp, there was really no particularly good reason to believe it. You're just really trusting the developer or the DBA that they hadn't been corrupted, or that no hacker had got in and changed that. And then blockchain gave us the ability for the first time to have immutable records where we could be sure that no one had manipulated them since they'd been, added. But there was no way you could build a sensible application on top of a blockchain platform. They just didn't have the storage capability, no schema, bad performance, bad economics. So what we've done at ProvenDB is we've added to MongoDB as our base platform a sort of an anchoring system that takes the data in MongoDB and creates digital signatures and anchors them to the blockchain transparently to you. You don't have to do anything for this to happen. And then if you want to assert that, like to an auditor or to some other regulator or to a customer that, no, this is the record, this is the proof of identity document, this is your will, this is the accounting transaction, these are the legal signatures, you can prove without any doubt whatsoever that the dates of these documents are correct.
So you decided to leave Tencent and start ZetaDB.
Yeah.
And so now you have a project called Kunlun. It sounds like you really approached your project by trying to take the best that was in Postgres and the best that was in MySQL and combine the two.
Yeah, exactly. Because I also worked on Postgres for several years in Teradata, and I know how it works. I know its strengths and weakness. So basically, in the Kunlun project, what I want to do is to combine the best of both Postgres and MySQL. And I believe the essence, the best part of Postgres is the query processing, and for MySQL it's the InnoDB storage engine and its binlog replication. Although it has also very good optimizer, yes, for sure. But anyway, I believe if I combine the two, I can build something new. That's the Kunlun distributed DBMS. Now we are very close to making it a commercial database system. It has all the basic functionality, including the transaction processing, the query processing, the common DDL and DML statements are all supported now. So, and it shows very good performance, and also other aspects, for example, stability, crash safety, and so on.
Yes, but at the same time, developers, they need evidence.
Yes.
They will probably trust my words, but it would not help them to fix the problem. They need evidence. So the tools I'm interested in, they may provide the evidence they need. And I try to provide it in a way they like. So I would say that over the last 5 years, the habits and preferences of MariaDB developers shaped the main tools I am trying to study. So it's not like out of the blue I decided to study something. No, I was asked a specific question. I was suggested a specific tool. They would like to get stack traces, for example, for everything, not a performance schema outputs for whatever reason. We can argue about that. It's clearly visible in specifically in MariaDB. So I am trying to provide what they want to see. If it's Windows, I am trying to study some Windows tools even. Speaking about the open source, luckily, most of them would be happy if the problem is repeatable on Linux, most of them, almost all of them. So that's why I have this benefit of using some older knowledge and studying really key, cool things that are found by others, are created by kernel developers for themselves. And maybe they are not yet so popular among MySQL DBAs, for example. I have a chance to make them popular and they use it. How it's possible that in a mature software that in the part of it that was there for, I don't know, 15 or 20 years, probably, they can assume that, like core protocol parts or whatever, we find some new bug. How is it even possible? That's because the test coverage for that specific part of the code had never been 100%, or it was at some stage, but then this coverage was removed, for example, while working on some new features, while speeding things up, while supporting different platforms. Things may be removed without nobody notice it until they break.
Yeah,
we would like to prevent that. So we are going even that far. Surely in the process, at least what will MySQL DBAs get from all this, and MariaDB DBAs, they will be prevented from going their own ways, for example, as I did, and I speak about that, trying quickly to trace every memory allocation with BPF trace. That's doable. That slows things down to not being practical. Great that I tried it myself way before I ever suggested it to anyone in production. Because getting your results in 10 minutes while sacrificing 3 times the performance, roughly like that.
Well, and this is where I see that there's...
It's awful. I would not ever want to suggest that to anyone without knowing it beforehand. So this is what I'm working on. I'm trying to be ready.
Yeah,
I
think there's two
I know
paths there,
good
though,
things and bad things about the tools I've already used. So that's the point. These new tools do not replace the historical procedures or common sense that all DBAs have.
I know MariaDB is very eager to work with the community on contributions. What sort of things are you looking for help with? How can people get involved?
We've got a GitHub account, and you can just send pull requests to there, and we'll work through and merge code. We get a lot of code actually contributed from distro maintainers, the NetBSDs, the FreeBSDs, just to add that little bit of extra portability to make them happy and get that working. There's, things like what I've mentioned that are just improvements and things that can get going. There's can also, I guess, we've got a knowledge base where you can write documentation. We've got a Zulip channel on zulip.mariadb.org, where you can just, like a Slack channel, it's a chat program where you can come in and talk to us about bugs, features, that kind of thing, or just SQL problems. Really, if you get us at the right time, we'll happily look through those and get a bit of insight into what you're doing.
Now, you mentioned you kind of moved from a DBA to a DBRE or a DBA. Has your role really changed that much? What responsibilities, but when you look at those two roles, a lot more companies are moving away from hiring quote unquote DBAs and more are looking at SREs or DBREs. What's the difference? I mean, you've lived in both worlds. What do you see as the difference between those two?
Yeah, from my side, like when if I talk about me, when I was at DBA, I was looking at only at one system. Like I was making sure that one system is up or like all the time, and then making sure that the performance is not impacted. But when I moved to DBE role, like instead of looking at the system at a single system, I was like managing hundreds or even thousands of servers and account for the high availability of the systems and even make sure that they are like reliable, not just a single system but the whole environment. That's a major difference. Like I no longer run any alter commands or anything. It's all automated. I don't no longer run a backup or anything. Like it's everything is automated at a system level. Even the point in time restore, everything is like we have like a lot of tools to automate that.
One of the things that you've talked about is synchronous replication versus asynchronous replication.
Like I mentioned in the talk, we are limited by the speed of light here. Light travels at a constant speed, and you are on the one side of the globe, and on the other side of the globe, it takes roughly around 0.5 milliseconds, I guess. But we can't tolerate that kind of latency. So that's why we definitely need to have async replication. But again, the biggest problem that comes into the mind is the conflict resolution. Like how do you resolve the conflicts when there are multiple writes at same process? So like last writer win is a very commonly used strategy across other databases as well, like across all the other distributed systems. So but the problem is MySQL does not have the native capability to give the any sort of conflict resolution, or even like for example, if you take Galera cluster, like there is no option to disable the certification process, because the certification process itself takes a lot of time. It has to communicate with all the nodes and get a act from all the nodes so that the site is certified. But that takes a lot of time, and there is no option to disable that certification process. And even if my application says it's my botheration to deal about the conflicts, or it's my botheration that I will take care of my data, but any synchronous replication or anything, they does not let you do it. Because that is their product, and it has to be, they give more weightage to the consistency part.